Paul is in Bow. Paul, what would you like to say?
Well, I just think, in your usual irrational way, that you're overstating the case and being totally unrealistic.
Which bit, Paul?
Well, the case, if you're having negotiations...
No, let's... I prefer to talk...
Would you let me say what I was going to say?
When you tell me what I've been irrational about, yes.
Well, I'm just about to, if you'd let me get on with it.
Well, go on then.
Thank you. When you have negotiations, the positions can't start off fixed and then remain fixed all the way throughout, otherwise you'll never have negotiations.
How's Barnier moved?
That's right. Now, would you just let me finish?
No, how's Barnier moved?
I would let me state my statement.
How has Barnier moved?
Would you let me state my statement?
Well, you've already said something that's not true.
No. You've got to allow me to develop my argument.
You carry on then, Paul. You develop away, my friend.
Are you going to allow me to finish?
Yes, Paul, carry on.
Thank you. That otherwise, so what happens is this: the UK position is that they want to preserve a free border with Ireland. That's it. If the EU are prepared to accept something like that, in other words, to modify their rules to suit the conditions of their own member state, Ireland, that might happen. If the EU show no intention of doing that, then you have to move to Plan B. And for Johnson to state what is the objective, and that is an objective which is also a public objective, and then deal with the alternatives if the EU aren't going to play ball, is just rational thinking. And I don't see how anybody can expect anybody else to do otherwise.
Well, let's begin with your first statement.
Views must change.
Yes, so let's begin with your first statement, that it's a negotiation and that means everybody moves. How has Michel Barnier's position on the Irish border changed since he first laid it out 18 months ago?
I don't think it has changed. But
you just said it has to.
Irrationality on the EU part.
No, irrationality is a description of facts.
No, what I'm saying is that they've entered...
No, I know what you're saying, Paul. I gave you lots of time to say it, and now we're examining it. So your first statement was that I had been irrational. I'm going to park my ego and not insist that you explain how.
Now, that's going to be a big job for you.
Absolutely it is. So let's look instead at what you said about negotiations. Michel Barnier's position last week and last year was that if we leave the customs union and the single market, there is no earthly way we can avoid having a hard border or moving the border to the sea. You said that positions change during negotiations. I would just give you one opportunity now to explain how his position has changed, ever.
Okay. Well, I must agree with you formally there. His position hasn't changed, which shows that they aren't proper negotiations.
No, it doesn't. It shows that his position is contractually binding. It's the nature of the Good Friday Agreement that says it cannot move.
No. Well, okay.
Well, yes, Paul, this isn't a matter of opinion. This is a matter, and I've allowed you to be rude to me, and I've allowed you to insist on talking even though you've got nothing to say, and I've allowed you to be personal. So here is the question now, okay? How do you have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border?
Are you asking me?
No, Paul, I'm asking Andy Pandy.
Okay, sorry, I thought you might have dropped me in from the conversation. No, the point I'm making is
I've heard your point. The question is this: how do you have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border? How do you make that happen, Paul?
Well, you have some sort of compromise whereby, as a sort...
You can't compromise the Good Friday Agreement, Paul.
You have compromised an electronic border. It is not beyond the wit of man for the EU and the UK to agree something which suits the special conditions of Ireland.
So you've just reached for that magic wand now that says electronic border, Paul. You don't know what you're talking about.
There is a solution to it.
Go on.
And if you're saying there isn't a solution...
Tell me what the solution is.
Then are you suggesting we should not leave the EU because of the Irish border?
You tell me what the solution is, Paul.
Are you suggesting that we cannot leave the EU because of the existence of the Irish border?
I am telling you that we cannot sustain the Good Friday Agreement and Brexit in its current form without either building a border in Ireland or moving... Oh, Paul, my friend, I'm sorry.
Well, it's just going to...
You carry on talking.
You can't expect 60 million people to have their future governed by a particular agreement.
So you rang in to tell me that I was being irrational about the Irish border, and you conclude the conversation by saying, actually, you're absolutely right. It's an utterly insuperable obstacle, but it shouldn't stop us from leaving the European Union.
Because it involves some renegotiation of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes. Have you read the Good Friday Agreement? Have you read the bit about renegotiations in the Good Friday Agreement?
Well,
The bit where it says it's a holding tactic?
Let's get this straight. Let's get this straight. What you're saying to the UK public is that we
not
cannot
saying
leave the
anything.
European Union because of the existence of the Good Friday Agreement.
No, we cannot have a hard Brexit that involves leaving the customs union and the single market because of the Good Friday Agreement. There's a thing that no.
Okay,
Let me
but
tell
if
you.
the-
Let me
if the
tell you some
EU
truths. Let me tell you
James,
something simple.
James, come on, let's just follow this through.
No, Paul.
James, let's follow this through. Let's follow this through.
Right, you carry on, mate.
No, let's follow this through. You're now saying is that the EU refused to change their rules or to modify their rules to suit the special case of Ireland, and on that basis, that means that the Good Friday Agreement can't be changed, and that means because the Good Friday Agreement can't be changed, the UK cannot leave the European
No, I
Union
haven't
ever.
said, Paul, here's a wonderful thing.
Well, answer that question, please.
You
That's
haven't
just
asked
mad.
a question. If you did, I just said no. You said, oh, is that what you're saying? I said no. Does that work in your head as an answer? Does that work in your head as an answer?
Well, say,
Right, good. So now, no, Paul, I'm going to insist on speaking now, because here's what you've done, okay? You phoned in to say that Boris Johnson is somehow embarked upon a very sophisticated and clever negotiating process. You've ended up by acknowledging that there is no solution to the problems that the Irish border presents that would involve retaining anything that remotely resembles what we've got now. You've added to that the idea that somehow I'm suggesting we have to stay in the European Union because of Brexit, because of the Irish border, which is simply not true. And the only question I have for you is this: how do you have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border
Well, you
after
don't,
Paul, you have to listen to me, because otherwise you just make all these weird noises and none of us ever learn anything. The simple instruction is this: identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border. One side is in the customs union and the single market, one side is in neither. Now make that work, Paul.
No doubt that there can be arrangements which will allow
Describe
a very
one.
special circumstance of those 2 million
Describe
people
them.
in the north of Ireland to be settled. There's
Describe
no
them,
doubt
Paul.
about it.
Describe them.
It's whether people are willing to do it or not.
Describe them.
Well, you know that it's a technical issue.
Well, describe it. I'm clever. I can keep up. Describe the circumstances in which you can make that work, Paul.
Because I don't have to go through all the details of it.
No, I don't want all the details, Paul. I want one detail.
You can have an electronic border. You can have the
But
trade.
what does that mean? What does that mean, Paul?
You can have it done electronically with a minimum.
How does an electronic border? How does an electronic border
test?
test?
No doubt about it.
Paul, how does an electronic border test the milk to see whether or not it's infected or not? How does an electronic border count the amount of barrels in the back of a lorry? How does an electronic border know whether I've got guns in my boot?
Milk isn't infected. You don't have to test all the milk all the time. Not all products coming from abroad. Not everything is tested
Okay.
all the time.
I've
Not
done my
every
best.
sample is tested.
I've done my
Not
best.
sample is tested.
No,
You're
because
just
there's
making it
no
up as you
border
go
there
along,
now.
James.
Paul, everything I've said is true.
No, it's not. You're making it up. You're putting extreme positions, unyielding positions.
All right, let me
and
ask
you're
you again,
ascribing
Paul.
them
How is the
directly to
border?
the EU.
How are we going to have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border
But they won't
when
be
one side is in the
identical.
customs
they
union?
will be compatible. That's all you have to have is compatibility. Some degree of compromise. Of course you can do it.
And it's a question of belief. You're absolutely
it's not a
certain
question
it
of
can be
belief. It's a
done, but you have
question of
no
desire
idea
and the will
how.
to do it. Of
Yes.
course it can be done.
How?
Well, I just told you. You have it as even
Okay, mate.
as
So
Alan
we're going for
Johnson
electronic
suggested.
borders.
You have.
I'm going to
some
give you
sort of
5 minutes now.
electronic
I'm going to give you 5
agreement
minutes to
registering of people to do certain
Yeah,
things.
5 minutes to
And then just
describe the electronic border. Go on.
You just let them get on with it.
Oh,
you just-
mate.
I'm sorry. You're inventing the difficulties because
I'm inventing the difficulties that Boris Johnson described as unthinkable economic and political madness.
Of course, no. That was because that is a UK negotiating. Because that's what they want the EU to agree to. But the EU are not yielding on it. Therefore, we have to move to Plan B.
What's Plan B again?
Well, Plan B is some form of electronic border.
Okay, let's just agree on that. The electronic border is the new unicorn. Am I right?
Well, one thing.
Yes, it's 10:48.